Imagine a world where, you know, your local neighborhood dhaba is paying more to fry a single batch of samosas than a major international airline is paying for the fuel to fly you all the way to Europe.
Right. It sounds completely backwards.
It really does.
Yeah.
Or picture a scenario where uh, a simple software update to a biological printer-like one sitting in a high school lab somewhere could trigger a global security crisis that basically bypasses every traditional military defense we have.
Yeah, which is terrifying when you actually think about the mechanics of it.
Exactly. I mean, we often think of global events as these isolated headlines, right? Like a trade deal happens over here,
Yeah.
a scientific breakthrough happens over there, or a central bank makes a decision in a country thousands of miles away.
But they're not isolated at all.
No, not even a little bit. When you look closer, the threads connecting all these events are incredibly tight.
Mm-hmm.
And pulling on just one of them can, well, it can unravel the entire fabric.
It forces a complete reassessment of how we view stability.
Right.
I mean, we are constantly relying on these outdated mental models to navigate a system that is shifting in real time.
Yeah.
If you are operating on assumptions from even 5 years ago, you are essentially flying blind in a hurricane.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, or the 3D Initiative of UPSC with Sard Kaushik.
So glad to be doing this.
Yeah, if you're tuning in, you are likely someone who refuses to look at an outdated map of the world. So whether you are a dedicated UPSC aspirant, gearing up to be a future policymaker, or you're just insanely curious about the invisible forces shaping our reality, this session is built entirely for you.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to comprehensively analyze the 10 major news topics from June 2, 2026. And we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going to extract the strategic significance, the economic impact, and the key terminology that actually matters.
Because we really need to look at the historical context and the underlying mechanisms for each of these developments. We can't just talk about what happened, right? We have to understand the why and the how.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our very first stop is right at the heart of how we even measure the reality we're living in.
The economic baseline.
Right. If you're trying to gauge the health of the Indian economy, you need a baseline. And that baseline just experienced a massive shift. The Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, or MOSPI, just released the first data under a newly revised Index of Industrial Production, the IIP.
This is a really big deal for data analysts.
Huge deal. They've shifted the base year from 2011-12 all the way to 2022-23. I like to think of this like updating your smartphone's operating system, or maybe updating a die tracking app.
That's a good way to look at it.
Because if your app is still measuring your daily intake of heavily processed trans fats that you stopped eating a decade ago, but it's completely ignoring the expensive protein powder you buy every week, your health data is completely useless.
It's detached from reality.
Exactly. I mean, nobody's really using CFL bulbs or kerosene as primary economic drivers anymore, so why were we still measuring them?
The smartphone OS analogy is helpful, but, we should expand on what this app update actually entails for macroeconomic modeling.
Please do.
So this is the 10th revision of the IIP base year since the index first started way back in 1937. For a UPSC aspirant, understanding the mechanics of this methodology is foundational.
Right, it's not just trivia.
No, not at all. The IIP is essentially a composite indicator. It measures the short-term changes in the volume of production of a whole basket of industrial products. We're looking at 3 broad sectors here. Manufacturing carries the lion's share, sitting at around 76% of the weight.
Wow, okay, 76%.
Yeah. Then mining is at about 14%, and electricity is at roughly 10%. The problem with the 2011-12 base year is that it creates a massive statistical illusion.
Because the economy has completely transformed since 2011.
Exactly. When you measure an economy using a 15-year-old basket of goods, you just miss all the structural transformations.
So by bringing the base year to 2022-23, effective June 1st, 2026, we are finally looking at a basket of items that reflects what India actually produces today.
Right.
The basket expanded from 407 to 463 item groups. The Technical Advisory Committee on IIP, the TAC IIP, they submitted their report on May 25, and they've napped over 1,000 specific products, adding 120 entirely new item groups.
And those additions are telling.
They really are. They're incredibly telling about where the country is going. They added CCTV cameras, magnetic stripe cards, medical stents, spacecraft parts, and human vaccines. And as I mentioned, they tossed out the obsolete stuffed kerosene, fluorescent tubes, and sewing machines.
It's a mirror reflecting India's high-tech manufacturing ambitions and its integration into global supply chains. But, the revision goes beyond just swapping out old items for new ones. It expands into entirely new structural sectors. For the first time ever, they have added water supply, sewage, and waste management to the broader tracking mechanisms.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they're also now tracking separate indices for renewable versus non-renewable electricity. If we look at the policy implications, this shows a government that desperately needs granular data on sustainable infrastructure to meet its climate commitments.
Because you can't manage what you don't measure.
Precisely. And under this new, highly modernized series, industrial production grew by 4.9% in April 2026, year on year.
Which is a solid bump compared to the 4.1% in March under the old series. But what really jumped out at me in the April data is the capital goods sector.
Ah, yes, the 16%.
Yeah, it grew by a massive 16%. Meanwhile, mining and quarrying actually contracted by 5.1%.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that capital goods are basically the machinery used to make other things, but a 16% spike seems abnormally high. What is driving that specific number, and why should we care?
That divergence between capital goods and mining is perhaps the most critical insight from the entire MOS-PI report. The Capital Goods Index measures the output of machinery, equipment, and tools used in production.
So like tractors and assembly line robots.
Exactly. Think of industrial boilers, heavy earth-moving equipment, or the robotics used on an auto line. When you see a 16% spike there, it is not just a backward-looking statistic, it is a leading indicator.
Meaning it tells us what's coming next.
Yes. It serves as a highly reliable proxy for future investment demand. It means companies are actively buying the machines that build other machines. They are expanding their capacity because they anticipate future consumer demand. This is often driven by massive government capital expenditure capex in infrastructure projects like highways, railways, and defense corridors.
I see. So the companies are gearing up. But what about the other side of that coin, the 5.1% contraction in mining? That seems like a red flag.
That is the vulnerability. You can build all the high-tech factories and purchase all the capital goods you want, but those factories require raw materials to actually operate.
Right.
The contraction in mining indicates a bottleneck at the very foundation of the supply chain. If we are trying to scale up high-tech manufacturing like electric vehicles, solar panels, and defense systems, we need an uninterrupted supply of critical minerals. And our domestic mining sector is currently struggling to keep pace with those manufacturing ambitions.
Which perfectly sets up this massive geopolitical pivot for our second topic.
It really does.
We're focused on building advanced technologies, but we lack the domestic raw materials to fuel them. That reality frames the highly strategic visit from our immediate neighborhood. I'm talking about Myanmar. From May 30 to June 3, 2026, Myanmar's president, U Min Aung Hlaing, made his first foreign visit as president.
And the timing and the destination are absolutely paramount here. It is highly significant that for his inaugural trip, he chose New Delhi over Beijing.
Right. He met with PM Modi at Hyderabad House. And the headline assurance coming out of the diplomatic press releases was the Myanmar president promising that their territory won't be used for any activities against India's security interests.
Which sounds great on paper.
Yeah, but I have a really hard time accepting that at face value. Let's look at the actual map here. The reality on the ground is that the junta, the Tatmadaw, only controls about 21% of Myanmar's territory.
Just 21%. That's a fraction of the country.
Exactly. The rest is largely held by this complex web of ethnic armed organizations, the EAOs, and various anti-junta forces. If they only control 1/5 of the country, how can they realistically promise to secure a 1,643-kilometer porous border and keep out anti-India insurgent elements like the NSCN or ULFA?
The simple answer is that they can't. They cannot guarantee it, and New Delhi is fully aware of that limitation. What you're identifying is the core paradox of India's neighborhood policy right now.
Okay, so what's the play?
It's a masterclass in pragmatic strategic balancing. New Delhi knows the junta's territorial control is severely limited and constantly eroding. However, in international relations, you still have to deal with the de jure government, especially one that has been internationally isolated since the 2021 coup.
So they have to play the official game.
Yes, but India is not putting all its eggs in the junta's basket. While they are rolling out the red carpet at Hyderabad House and maintaining official state-to-state relations, Indian intelligence and the military apparatus are maintaining quiet back-channel contacts with key ethnic armed groups along the border.
Because at the end of the day, India just needs that border secure. The geography dictates the policy. We share borders with 4 northeastern states, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram. It really doesn't matter who holds the checkpoint on the Myanmar side, as long as they aren't letting insurgents cross over to destabilize India.
Precisely, though I would add that the stakes go far beyond just border insurgency and internal security. Let's look at the economic and strategic drivers that were actually negotiated during this visit.
Let's hear it.
They agreed to increase bilateral trade from the current $2 billion, expanding the rupee Kayat settlement mechanism to bypass dollar dependence. They also deeply discussed the Caledon multimodal transport project.
Let's break down the Caledon project physically, because the logistics of it are fascinating to me.
The Caledon project is essentially a geographical workaround. India's northeast is landlocked and relies heavily on the narrow Siliguri corridor, the chicken's neck, to connect to the rest of India.
Right, which is a massive strategic vulnerability.
Exactly. So the Caledon project connects the eastern Indian seaport Kolkata to the Sittwe seaport in Myanmar by sea. From Sittwe, it travels up the Caledon River by boat to Palatwa and then by road into Mizoram. It gives India's northeast a vital alternative sea outlet.
Wow.
But has been plagued by delays precisely because the territory it runs through is highly contested by the Arakan Army, which is one of the most powerful EAOs.
So again, dealing with the junta in New Delhi doesn't solve the reality of the Arakan Army controlling the actual physical route of our infrastructure project.
No, it doesn't.
But beyond trade routes, the most critical piece of this bilateral puzzle is beneath the soil. It brings us back to that mining contraction we talked about in the IIP data.
The rare earth minerals. Myanmar is currently the world's 4th largest producer of rare earths. But we have to make a crucial distinction here. It is not just about the volume of rare earths. It is about the specific type.
Okay, what type?
They are incredibly rich in heavy rare earths, specifically elements like dysprosium and terbium. These are largely located in the Kachin and Shan states.
I think people hear rare earth and just imagine, generic rocks. But dysprosium and terbium are the absolute bedrock of the 21st century economy.
They're irreplaceable.
Yeah. Dysprosium is used to make permanent magnets that operate at extremely high temperatures. You absolutely need it for the motors in electric vehicles and for the generators in wind turbines. And terbium is used in solid-state devices and advanced defense systems.
Right.
If India wants that 16% growth in capital goods to translate into a high-tech revolution, if we want to hit our EV targets and build our own semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem, we simply cannot do it without a secured supply of heavy rare earths.
And this is where the geopolitical chess game really accelerates. Because if India does not secure those minerals, China will.
And China's already there.
Oh, China already has a massive entrenched footprint in Myanmar through their Belt and Road Initiative. They are building roads, pipelines, and dams. Most critically, they are developing the Kyaukphyu deep-sea port.
Which is huge.
It is. Kyaukphyu gives China direct access to the Indian Ocean, which allows them to completely bypass the Malacca Strait choke point. This is a core component of what strategists call the string of pearls. So India's engagement with the junta, under the framework of the Act East policy, is a dual-pronged strategy. It is partly about securing access to those heavy rare earths for our own industrial survival, and partly about ensuring Myanmar does not become an uncontested, fully integrated Chinese satellite state right on our eastern border.
That is, we are fighting tooth and nail to secure physical rare earth minerals to build advanced, tangible technologies. Things we can hold in our hands like EV batteries, solar panels, and defense systems.
Physical hardware.
Yes, hardware. But at the exact same time, the very definition of technology is undergoing a radical shift at a microscopic level. We are transitioning from mining rocks out of the ground to mining, or rather, entirely rewriting the code of life itself.
It's a huge leap.
It is. Which brings us to our third area of analysis today, synthetic biology.
This is a field that sits right at the intersection of profound utopian promise and terrifying existential peril. To understand it, we first have to define it clearly.
Let's do it.
Synthetic biology, or synbio, takes established engineering principles, things like standardization, abstraction, decoupling, and applies them directly to biology. It is the design and construction of new biological parts, devices, and systems, or the redesign of existing natural biological systems for useful purposes.
So we're talking about organisms or genetic sequences that simply do not exist in nature.
Exactly.
I used the analogy of a 3D printer earlier, and I think it holds up perfectly here. With traditional 3D printer, you can go online, download a CAD blueprint file, and print a plastic toy or mechanical gear right on your desk.
Right.
But with synthetic biology, using what are known as benchtop DNA synthesizers, you are essentially downloading a biological sequence and printing actual genetic material. You are printing life.
And the tools driving this are revolutionary. They have advanced at a breakneck pace over the last decade. You have CRISPR-Cas9, which is often described as molecular scissors.
Which won the Nobel Prize.
Yes, exactly. It allows scientists to cut DNA at specific targeted locations and insert or remove genetic material with incredible precision. You have massive biofoundries that allow for automated, high-throughput manufacturing of biological designs.
It's industrial scale biology.
It really is. And crucially, we are now seeing the AI-SynBio convergence. Artificial intelligence models like DeepMind's AlphaFold have fundamentally solved the protein folding problem.
Which used to take years.
It used to take years of painstaking laboratory work. Now, AI can predict the 3D structure of a protein just from its amino acid sequence in seconds. The industry is currently valued at roughly $19.55 billion, but conservative estimates expect it to hit nearly $97 billion by 2035.
And the promises are staggering.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about engineering CAR T-cell therapies where we program a patient's own immune cells to hunt down and destroy specific cancer cells.
Which is already saving lives.
Yes, we are creating personalized mRNA vaccines on demand. Agricultural scientists are designing drought-resistant crops that fix their own nitrogen, which could eliminate the need for synthetic fertilizers. There are even engineered bacteria that can literally eat pea plastic pollution or produce biohydrogen for clean energy.
It sounds like a miracle, right?
It sounds like we are on the verge of solving every major crisis humanity faces.
Huh.
But there is a massive catch.
The catch is the dual-use dilemma. The classic dual-use research of concern, or DURC.
Explain that for us.
A piece of scientific research or a technological tool can be entirely beneficial, but in the wrong hands, or even through accidental misuse, it can be catastrophic. The fundamental issue is that the exact same tools used to create life-saving cures are indistinguishable from the tools used to create biological weapons.
The U.S. National Academies recently published a report identifying the top 3 biosecurity threats in this space, and honestly, reading it is like reading the outline for a dystopian thriller.
It's very sobering.
It is. First, they highlighted the threat of recreating dangerous viruses, like Ebola, smallpox, or highly pathogenic avian influenza from scratch using synthetic DNA. Second, taking existing common bacteria and engineering them to be more lethal, for example, by inserting severe antibiotic resistance genes.
Superbacteria.
Yeah, superbacteria. And third, engineering microbes to act as microscopic factories that just pump out harmful biochemicals or toxins.
And what makes this uniquely dangerous today compared to a decade ago is that the barrier to entry is plummeting rapidly.
That's the scary part.
Historically, if a nation wanted to create a biological weapon, it required a massive state-sponsored laboratory, immense financial resources, and a team of highly specialized PhDs in virology and genetics.
Like the Manhattan Project for Biology.
Exactly. But today, the convergence of AI and SynBio is completely changing the threat matrix. AI can theoretically design novel pathogen sequences that are entirely unknown to science, which means they easily bypass conventional biosafety filters and current screening protocols. And those affordable benchtop DNA synthesizers you mentioned, they are becoming smaller, cheaper, and more accessible. We are approaching a reality where small groups, or even rogue individuals, could potentially synthesize pathogenic material in a garage lab.
Wait, I really need to pause on this. If technology is getting this democratized, how on earth do you regulate a 3D printer for viruses? If the digital sequence can just be emailed, how do you stop someone from printing a pathogen?
That is the exact governance gap the entire global security apparatus is struggling with right now. In the United States, they recognize the threat and have recently signed the Biosecure Act.
What does that do?
This legislation specifically restricts government agencies from procuring biotechnology equipment or services from companies of concern, which currently targets several major Chinese biotech firms. The U.S. is also heavily debating the Biosecurity Modernization and Innovation Act of 2026, which attempts to put physical guardrails on the sale and tracking of benchtop synthesizers and the reagent chemicals they require.
But what about India? Are we prepared for this? Because we are a signatory to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, the BWC, which unequivocally prohibits the development, production, and stockpiling of bioweapons.
Yes, we are.
But does a treaty drafted during the Cold War actually cover an AI model designing a novel virus sequence on a laptop?
No, it really doesn't. Legally, the BWC focuses on the physical agents and the intent to use them as weapons, but it struggles immensely with the digital transfer of genetic information.
The code itself.
Right. Currently, India lacks a specific, comprehensive domestic governance framework tailored strictly for synthetic biology and its unique biosecurity risks. We do have regulatory bodies. We have the Department of Biotechnology, the DBT, and the Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation, the RCGM.
But what's their focus?
Well, we have to look at their historical mandate. They were designed primarily for biosafety, preventing accidental leaks of genetically modified crops or ensuring safety in laboratory research. They are not explicitly designed as intelligence or national security apparatuses for synbiosecurity.
Which is a totally different thing.
Exactly. Security is about preventing intentional, malicious engineering by state or non-state actors. It is a massive legal, ethical, and strategic gray area that requires immediate legislative attention.
Creating legal frameworks for unprecedented, rapidly evolving technology like synthetic biology requires a robust, agile, and fully staffed judiciary. You need courts capable of interpreting the Constitution in ways that account for artificial intelligence and genetic engineering.
You definitely do.
And that takes us straight to the heart of the Indian legal system, our fourth area of analysis today.
Yes. On June 1st, 2026, the central government rapidly notified the appointment of 5 new judges to the Supreme Court of India. This notification came just 4 days after the Supreme Court Collegium recommended their names on May 27.
Now, hold on a second. This is where the context is everything. Usually when we read about the Collegium and the executive branch regarding judicial appointments, it is framed as this grueling, months-long, and sometimes years-long tug of war.
Oh, absolutely.
Files get returned, names get delayed, objections are raised over background checks. A 4-day clearance is practically warp speed. What does this signal about the current dynamic between the judiciary and the government?
It is highly unusual, and it signals a moment of profound alignment, or at the very least, a mutual recognition of absolute urgency regarding the state of the courts.
Who are the new judges?
Let's look at who was elevated. We have the chief justices from the high courts of Bombay, Punjab, and Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, and Jammu and Kashmir, and Ladakh, but notably, we also have senior advocate V.S. Mohana.
Which is a big deal.
It is. It's a rare direct elevation from the bar to the Supreme Court, rather than being promoted from a high court bench.
And this rapid notification brings the total working strength of the Supreme Court to 37 judges, which is just one single seat shy of the newly sanctioned strength of 38.
That is correct. The Senate recently passed the Supreme Court, number of judges, Amendment Ordinance 2026, raising that maximum ceiling from 34 to 38. And the reason why this matters so deeply for anyone studying Indian governance is the underlying systemic crisis of pendency.
It's the elephant in the room.
It is. The Supreme Court of India alone has over 80,000 pending cases on its docket. Nationally, when you aggregate the district courts and the high courts across the country, we're looking at a staggering figure of over 5 crore pending cases.
5 crore. That is a number so large it loses meaning. That is a generational bottleneck for justice. It means millions of people are waiting decades just to have their basic rights adjudicated.
It is a crisis of state capacity. And by operating at a near full strength of 37 judges, the Supreme Court can finally begin to systematically address this.
And it also affects the bigger constitutional questions, right?
More importantly, yes. A full court allows the Chief Justice to constitute more constitution benches. A constitution bench requires a minimum of 5 judges. These benches are not for routine appeals or bail hearings. They are required to decide substantial questions of constitutional law or to interpret core fundamental rights.
So when they don't have enough judges, these big questions just stall.
Exactly. When the court is severely understaffed, judges are bogged down in the daily grind of routine matters. Consequently, complex constitutional issues, like the limits of executive power, federal disputes between states, or perhaps future unprecedented cases on data privacy, AI, and biosecurity, get indefinitely delayed.
To really understand why this 4-day clearance is such a marvel, we need to touch on the history of the collegium system itself. Because it isn't actually written anywhere in the original text of the 1950 Constitution, is it?
No, it is not. Article 124 of the Constitution simply states that Supreme Court judges are to be appointed by the President in consultation with the Chief Justice and other judges.
Consultation. That's the key word.
It is. But the interpretation of that word, consultation, led to decades of friction. Through a series of landmark judgments collectively known as the three judges cases, specifically the S.B. Gupta case in 1981, the Sayawar case in 1993, and the presidential reference in 1998, the Supreme Court evolved the collegium system.
So they essentially reinterpreted it.
Exactly. The 1993 judgment essentially rewrote the rules by declaring that consultation meant concurrence. It established the primacy of the judiciary in its own appointments, effectively making the recommendation of the CJI and a collegium of the senior-most judges binding on the executive branch, minimizing political interference.
But the executive branch has pushed back on that heavily over the years.
I have.
Most notably with the attempt to create the National Judicial Appointments Commission, the NJJC, which the Supreme Court struck down in 2015 as unconstitutional.
Right. That was a massive flashpoint.
Since then, the friction is often manifested in the government delaying the approval of collegium recommendations by sitting on the Memorandum of Procedure, the MOP, which is exactly why this 4-day frictionless clearance is so striking. It shows the system can work efficiently when the urgency is recognized.
When everyone is on the same page.
So, the Supreme Court is sitting at near full capacity, acting as the ultimate protector of the fundamental rights of citizens, most importantly, Article 21, the right to life. But when we transition from the legal definition of the right to life to the actual physiological health of the nation, the data reveals a massive, deeply concerning paradox.
And that brings us to the newly released findings of the NFHS 6.
Yes, our fifth topic.
The National Family Health Survey, Round 6, conducted during the 2023-24 period, was just officially released by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. It is a massive undertaking, covering 6.79 lakh households across 715 districts.
This is massive.
The NFHS is widely considered the gold standard for tracking India's demographic shifts and health indicators. It is the data set upon which national policies are built.
And the top-line numbers show some incredible victories for state capacity. We are looking at maternal health gains that are truly historic.
They really are.
95.9% of pregnant women receive antenatal care, or ANC. First trimester registrations are up significantly. Institutional deliveries, meaning women giving birth in a hospital or health center rather than at home, have hit record levels. Immunization coverage for things like rotavirus has more than doubled. Furthermore, the data shows that women's internet access and financial inclusion, like owning and operating their own bank accounts, have expanded massively.
It's a huge step forward. Additionally, the survey highlights a sharp spike in health insurance coverage. This is largely driven by the rollout and stabilization of PMJY, the Ayushman Bharat scheme, which provides a 5 lakh rupee per year hospitalization cover to the bottom 40% of the population.
Which is a lifeline for so many families.
From a public policy perspective, achieving these levels of coverage in a country of 1.4 billion people is a monumental achievement in infrastructure and logistics.
But, and this is where I really struggle to reconcile the data, we have this world-class health insurance expansion. We have record institutional deliveries. Yet, buried in the survey, the data shows that only 15.3% of children aged 6 to 23 months are receiving an adequate diet.
Yeah, that's the heartbreaking part.
I just don't understand this.
Yeah.
How is it mechanically possible to have such advanced medical financial safety nets and get mothers into hospitals for birth while simultaneously failing at the most basic level of child caloric and nutritional intake?
It is deeply distressing, and it highlights the difference between clinical interventions and systemic nutritional security. What we are witnessing is the tragic paradox of India's current developmental stage. Epidemiologists refer to this as the double burden of disease.
Let's break down the first half of that burden.
Okay. Despite massive, well-funded initiatives like Kushan Abhiyan, we're still battling chronic intergenerational issues of undernutrition, stunting, which is low height for age indicating chronic malnutrition, and wasting, which is low weight for height indicating acute malnutrition, have shown marginal improvements.
But they are still way too high.
Way too high. However, anemia remains a stubborn, major concern, affecting massive percentages of women and young children. An adequate diet isn't just about calories. It requires minimum dietary diversity, fruits, vegetables, proteins, which remains economically out of reach for many.
So that is the undernutrition side of the ledger.
Yeah.
We are failing to adequately feed infants during their most critical window of cognitive and physical development. But you called it a double burden. What is the other side?
The other side is the terrifying rise in non-communicable lifestyle diseases. The NFHS 6 data reveals that 22.1% of men and 19.4% of women are now suffering from hypertension or high blood pressure.
Wow.
27.3% of women are classified as overweight or obese. Between 17 and 21% of the population has high blood sugar, putting them pre-diabetic or diabetic. And here's the most crucial shift.
Right.
This is no longer just a disease of the urban elite or the upper middle class. These lifestyle diseases are surging rapidly in rural areas.
It is like the country skipped a developmental stage entirely. We're dealing with the diseases of severe poverty like underfed, anemic infants at the exact same time, and often in the exact same households as we are dealing with the diseases of affluence like obesity, hypertension, and diabetes.
There is actually a fascinating, albeit grim, biological mechanism behind this overlap. It is known as the thrifty phenotype hypothesis, or the Barker hypothesis.
The Barker hypothesis, how does that work?
It suggests that when a fetus is exposed to malnutrition in the womb, its body adapts to expect a life of severe scarcity. Its metabolism permanently shifts to store every possible calorie as fat.
Oh, wow.
If that child grows up and suddenly has access to cheap, highly processed, calorie-dense but nutrient-poor foods, which is happening rapidly in rural India, their body aggressively stores it, leading to a massive spike in adult obesity and diabetes. The malnutrition of the infant literally programs the obesity of the adult.
That is incredibly sobering. The very biology of the population is trapped between these two extremes.
And we must also acknowledge the vast regional disparities here. The NFHS is a national average, but India is essentially a continent of varying developmental realities.
Right, a state-by-state breakdown is crucial.
Exactly. The data from a state like Kerala, with high literacy and robust primary health care, looks like a different country compared to the Empowered Action Group, or EAG states like Bihar, UP, or Jharkhand. In those regions, the last-mile delivery of nutrition services through Anganwadis remains deeply flawed.
So what's the takeaway for policymakers?
The challenge for a future policymaker is immensely complex. Building a hospital to treat hypertension is straightforward. Fundamentally fixing a population's foundational diet across wildly different economic strata is infinitely harder.
We can try to fix what we put into our bodies through diet, but we also have to look at what we're forcing our bodies to breathe. We are what we eat, but we are also what we inhale. And that brings us to a major environmental paradox currently choking Indian cities.
Our sixth topic, we are talking about the severe crisis of summer air pollution.
Right, and I am genuinely confused by this phenomenon. When we think of Indian smog, specifically in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, we think of winter.
Exactly, November in Delhi.
Yeah, we picture Delhi in November. A thick, gray, freezing blanket of cold air. We expect summer to be associated with intense heat, yes, but also with wind, clear skies, and eventually the monsoon. Yet, peak summer, specifically from April to June, is suffocating cities with terrible, hazardous air quality indices before the monsoon even arrives.
It catches people off guard.
It totally does. If there is no winter inversion trapping the cold air, why is the air in May worse than November? Is the intense heat just baking the car exhaust into a new kind of smog?
Your use of the word baking is actually the perfect entry point into the atmospheric chemistry involved here. What we are experiencing in the summer is not the same type of pollution we see in the winter. We are dealing with a photochemical reality.
Photochemical.
In winter, the primary threat is fine particulate matter, PM2.5, which gets trapped by cold air. But the primary culprit in summer is ground-level ozone, or O3. Now, we have to differentiate.
Because usually ozone is a good thing, right?
Well, stratospheric ozone high up in the atmosphere is good. It forms the ozone layer that protects us from solar UV rays. But tropospheric ground-level ozone is a highly toxic reactive gas that severely damages human lung tissue and reduces crop yields.
The vehicles don't emit ozone from their tailpipes, so where is this toxic gas actually coming from?
Ground-level ozone is not emitted directly into the air. It is created by chemical reactions between oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
Okay, NOx and VOCs, where do those come from?
NOx primarily comes from the high-temperature combustion of fossil fuels, vehicle exhaust, coal power plants, and industrial boilers. VOCs come from chemical plants, petrol pumps, paints, and solvents.
Got it.
When you take that mixture of NOx and VOCs and apply the intense, relentless summer sunlight and high UV radiation of May and June, a complex photochemical reaction occurs that literally cooks these precursor gases into ozone.
So the sunlight is the trigger.
Yes. Unlike winter PM2.5, which often peaks at night or in the early cold mornings, This ozone pollution directly tracks with the sun, peaking dangerously between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on the hottest, sunniest days.
So the intense summer sun itself is acting as the catalyst, turning our everyday emissions into a toxic, invisible gas.
Exactly. And the situation is heavily compounded by a meteorological phenomenon involving the planetary boundary layer, or the PBL.
What's the BDL?
The PBL is the lowest part of the atmosphere, the layer that directly interacts with the Earth's surface. Think of it like a lid over a city. On incredibly hot, windless pre-monsoon days, you can get thermal inversions where a layer of warm air traps cooler air below it. The PBL becomes very shallow.
So the lid comes down.
Right. So instead of the pollution dispersing high into the atmosphere, this lid presses down, effectively trapping these highly concentrated pollutants, including the freshly baked ozone, right at the surface level where millions of people are trying to breathe.
And it is not just the invisible ozone that is a problem. We are also getting battered by visible dust. I mean, the air physically hurts to look at sometimes.
Yes, the phenomenon known as Andi. These are intense, towering dust storms that originate from the arid regions of Rajasthan and the dry riverbeds in May and June. Powerful thermal winds carry massive amounts of coarse particulate matter, PM10.
And they sweep across the plains.
They sweep aggressively across the Indo-Gangetic Plain, choking major urban centers like Jaipur, Delhi, and Kanpur. When you combine this natural PM10 with the photochemical ozone, the air quality index plummets.
And just to add fuel to the fire, literally, you also have the agricultural cycle. You have the rabi crop stubble burning happening in Punjab and Haryana during the April and May wheat harvest.
Which is a massive contributor.
And you had the massive uncontrolled forest fires in states like Uttarakhand and Odisha, which release immense amounts of black carbon and VOCs into the atmosphere. And because it is the pre-monsoon season, there is zero rain to wash any of this out of the sky.
It just sits there.
The atmosphere over northern India just acts like a giant, stagnant, sun-baked bowl, collecting ozone, desert dust, and agricultural smoke.
It makes you look at policy interventions like the National Clean Air Program, the NCAP, which has an incredibly ambitious target to reduce particulate concentration by 40% by 2026, and realize how multidimensional the challenge really is.
Not a simple fix.
Not at all. You aren't just fighting vehicular tailpipes, you are fighting the geography of the Himalayas, trapping the air, the chemistry of sunlight, and complex meteorological wind patterns.
But a massive source of the NAPAs and VOCs fueling that summer ozone still comes directly from our consumption of fossil fuels. We are burning an immense amount of oil and gas, and right now the economics of those fuels are doing something very counterintuitive on the global market.
Which brings us to our seventh topic, the strange bifurcated dynamics happening right now in fuel pricing.
Yes, on June 1st, we saw some highly specific pricing changes implemented by the oil companies. Commercial LPG, which are the blue, 19-kilogram cylinders used exclusively by businesses, restaurants, and hotels, was hiked by 42 rupees.
That's a significant jump.
In Delhi, a single commercial cylinder now costs over 3,113 rupees. This marks the fifth consecutive hike in just 4 months. Meanwhile, International Aviation Turbine Fuel, ATF, the fuel used by international flights, was slashed by a massive 27%.
A huge drop.
And right in the middle of this, domestic LPG for households, along with regular retail petrol and diesel, remained completely unchanged.
The contrast is jarring.
Okay, let's go back to my Daba analogy from the start of the show, because this is where the rubber meets the road for the average citizen. The airline flying a luxury long-haul route to Europe gets a massive 27% discount on fuel, but the local caterer or Daba down the street is paying over 3,100 rupees to run their kitchen. How does the underlying math of that pricing structure actually work?
It is a perfect real-time case study in how governments actively intervene to insulate certain politically sensitive sectors from global shocks while completely exposing others to the free market.
Break it down for us.
Let's look at the mechanics. Domestic cooking gas, the red cylinders used in homes, is heavily subsidized. The government shields households from the wild volatility of global energy markets because a spike in home cooking costs leads to immediate mass social distress and political backlash.
Nobody wants that.
Exactly. But the oil marketing companies, the OMC's companies like Indian Oil Corporation, Bharat Petroleum, and Hindustan Petroleum are bleeding cash to maintain those low household prices. They are currently suffering an estimated 650 crore rupees a day in what the industry calls under-recoveries.
Just to clarify, under-recovery. That means the ONCs are buying crude oil on the international market at a high global price, paying for refining and logistics, but the government is forcing them to sell the final refined product to citizens at an artificially lower price.
Precisely. They are selling fuel significantly below cost. So how do these massive corporations survive that daily loss? They have to cross-subsidize.
Ah, so they shift the burden.
They pass those massive costs onto the commercial sector, which is not shielded by government subsidies. Commercial LPG prices are directly exposed to the geopolitical volatility in West Asia, specifically the ongoing disruptions and insurance premiums associated with shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
Because of the conflict risks.
Yes. When global imports get squeezed and prices rise, the OMCs hike the commercial rate to recoup their losses. The dabas, caterers, and hotels bear the brunt. And naturally, they cannot absorb a 3,100 rupee cylinder, so they pass that cost onto the consumer.
Which means more expensive food for everyone.
Right, which is a major driver of localized restaurant and service inflation.
Okay, that explains why my restaurant bill is going up. But then why did the international aviation turbine fuel suddenly get 27% cheaper on the exact same day? If the Strait of Hormuz is causing issues for LPG, shouldn't it make jet fuel more expensive too?
The divergence lies in how the fuels are priced and sourced. ATF for international flights is priced entirely differently. It is priced directly in US dollars per kiloliter, whereas domestic ATF and LPG are priced in rupees.
Oh, that makes a big difference.
It does. While the localized tensions around the Hormuz conflict are causing specific supply chain bottlenecks for certain refined products like LPG, the broader aggregate global crude prices actually showed some moderation recently due to slowing global demand.
So the global price of crude was actually softening a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the Indian airline industry lobbied the government heavily because soaring international ATF was crippling their operations and making Indian carriers uncompetitive globally. This 27% cut essentially aligns the international rates offered at Indian airports closer to global market levels, providing massive relief to Indian carriers flying long-haul routes.
It highlights how deeply tied global energy is to currency markets. ATF for international flights is priced in USD because the entire global economy, particularly energy, runs on the dollar.
Everything hinges on it.
But speaking of global finance and currency markets, a massive structural shift in Japan's monetary policy is sending ripples all the way to Dalal Street in Mumbai. That is our 8th deep dive today.
We're looking at the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, and their highly anticipated decision regarding their decade-long ultra-loose monetary policy, or ULMP. The news is that they are likely pausing their exit from this policy.
I want to unpack this carefully because Japanese bond yields can seem incredibly abstract. Let's use an analogy.
That was good.
For the last decade, Japan has basically functioned as the world's cheapest ATM. After years of deflation and economic stagnation, the Bank of Japan pushed their interest rates to zero and in some cases into negative territory.
People were practically paid to borrow money.
Basically. So global investors, massive hedge funds, institutional banks would go to this Japanese ATM, borrow billions of Japanese yen incredibly cheaply with almost zero interest. They would then take that borrowed yen, convert it into dollars or rupees, and invest it everywhere else in the world where they could get a higher return. They bought U.S. Treasury bonds, they poured money into Indian equities, they funded tech startups.
You have perfectly described the mechanics of the yen carry trade, borrowing in a low-yield currency to invest in a higher-yield asset. The investor pockets the difference in interest rates. It is essentially geopolitical arbitrage.
And it's huge.
It's massive. And this specific trade has been a foundational pillar of global market liquidity for over a decade. It has artificially inflated asset prices worldwide. But recently, inflation finally started ticking up in Japan.
Which means the BOJ had to act.
In response, the Bank of Japan started signaling a historic shift. They initiated a bond taper. This means the central bank was reducing its purchases of Japanese government bonds, JGBs. This is a classic form of quantitative tightening, or QT.
So the cheap ATM was threatening to start charging high transaction fees.
Exactly. When a central bank stops buying its own bonds, the price of those bonds falls. And because bond prices and yields move inversely, the yields on 10-year Japanese government bonds hit multi-decade highs.
So
Suddenly, for the first time in years, you could actually get a decent return by keeping your money in Japan.
which triggers what the market fears most, a reverse carry trade.
Yes. A reverse carry trade is a sudden, violent unwinding of all those leveraged positions. If holding Japanese assets is suddenly attractive again, or if the cost of borrowing yen goes up, those global investors scramble to pay back their cheap yen loans.
And to pay them back, they have to sell everything else.
Exactly. To do that, they have to sell off their assets in emerging markets. Capital rapidly flows out of places like the Indian stock market. This massive outflow weakens the rupee against the dollar and severely tightens domestic liquidity.
But the crucial update for June 2 is that the Bank of Japan is reportedly pausing this tightening process. They are backing off.
They are pausing because the pace of the tightening was creating intense stress within Japan's own domestic financial system. Key bondholders and regional Japanese banks pressured the BOJ to slow down.
Plus, the global situation is a mess.
That too. The global macroeconomic environment is incredibly fragile. With the ongoing geopolitical stress in the Middle East and high interest rates in the U.S., global risk aversion is peaking. A sudden, aggressive tightening by Japan could have triggered a severe, cascading global financial shock.
So this pause is actually good news for us.
Yes, this pause by the BOJ is actually a massive sigh of relief for emerging markets. For India, it means foreign institutional investor flows, the FII, are less likely to suddenly dry up and flee back to Tokyo. It gives the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, much-needed breathing room to manage our own domestic inflation and interest rates without having to simultaneously fight off massive capital flight.
It is wild how sensitive global capital is to the slightest hint of instability. A fraction of a percent change in a bond yield on a trading desk in Tokyo literally dictates the trajectory of the stock market in Mumbai.
It's all connected.
But while the highly interconnected financial markets obsess over Japan's monetary policy and quarter-point rate hikes, the international community is largely ignoring an actual devastating collapse of stability in Africa. Which brings us to our 9th topic of analysis.
We must turn our attention to the rapidly escalating civil war in South Sudan. It is a profoundly overlooked crisis that has massive implications for international law, the future of UN peacekeeping operations, and specifically for India's strategic footprint in Africa.
Let's set the historical context here, because the speed of the collapse is tragic. South Sudan is the world's newest nation. It gained independence from Sudan in 2011 after decades of conflict.
A moment of huge hope.
But almost immediately, it fell into a brutal civil war along deep ethnic and political lines. The primary conflict is between forces loyal to President Salva Kiir, who is an ethnic Dinka, and Vice President Riek Machar, who is an ethnic Nuer. In 2018, after immense international pressure, they signed a peace agreement known as the RARCSS, which created a highly fragile unity government.
But that fragile unity government has fundamentally collapsed.
What was the spark this time?
The precipitating event occurred in March 2025 when President Kiir moved to consolidate absolute power. He placed Vice President Machar under house arrest, charging him with treason. This aggressive political maneuver shattered the 2018 agreement and triggered a massive resurgence of armed violence that has stretched continuously into 2026.
It's just devastating.
The fighting is no longer localized. It has spread like wildfire across critical regions, particularly Jonglei State and the Upper Nile.
And the reports coming out of the region are harrowing. We are seeing the massive mobilization of the White Army.
Right, which isn't a formal army at all.
Exactly. This isn't a formal military unit. It is an incredibly vast, informal, armed militia comprised primarily of newer youth, heavily armed and seeking retaliation. They have overrun formal government army barracks in multiple towns.
And the government response has been brutal.
In ruthless retaliation, government state forces have resorted to dropping unguided barrel bombs on civilian areas suspected of harboring opposition. They have even issued a 72-hour evacuation order for all civilians, NGOs, and UN personnel from major towns like Akobo, effectively creating a total blockade of all humanitarian access to starving populations.
For a UPSC aspirant or anyone analyzing global affairs, you might ask why a civil war in South Sudan is a critical focal point for Indian policy.
Why are we talking about it?
The answer lies in India's massive, historical commitment to global stability through UNAAS, the United Nations mission in South Sudan. UNAS is one of the world's largest and most dangerous peacekeeping missions, and India is historically one of the largest troop-contributing nations to the UN.
So Indian soldiers are directly in the line of fire.
Yes. Thousands of Indian soldiers, medical personnel, and engineers are stationed right in the crossfire in volatile places like Jonglei and Akobo.
And these Indian troops are being asked to maintain peace while the UN itself is facing an existential financial crisis.
That is the core tragedy of the current moment. UNMISS is facing severe, debilitating funding cuts. This is largely driven by a broader political movement in the United States to reduce assessed contributions to UN peacekeeping budgets.
So the money's just drying up.
Rapidly. The operational impact on the ground is immediate and severe. Essential protection patrols by peacekeepers have been reduced by up to 70% in some contested areas because they simply lack the fuel and logistical support. Critical human rights monitoring missions have been canceled entirely.
That's a massive dereliction of duty by the international community.
It is. The foundational mandate of UNMISS is to protect civilians under the international legal principle of the responsibility to protect, or R2P, a doctrine established at the 2005 UN World Summit. But you have Indian peacekeepers being asked to fulfill this massive moral and legal mandate with drastically shrinking resources right at the exact moment the violence is reaching a fever pitch.
And the political horizon is entirely bleak. National elections were planned for December 2026, intended to complete the democratic transition. Those are now at severe risk of being deferred indefinitely.
Which just prolongs the suffering.
It does. This level of instability threatens to spill over the borders and pull in the entire East African Regional Body, IGAD, destabilizing the Horn of Africa. It's a sobering reminder that India's role on the global stage isn't just about negotiating trade agreements and developing tech. It involves putting boots on the ground and risking Indian lives to maintain fragile peace in the most dangerous corners of the world.
However, a nation's ability to project that kind of global power, whether it's funding peacekeeping operations in Africa, securing rare earths in Myanmar, or managing domestic inflation, is fundamentally underwritten by its economic and energy security.
It always comes back to energy and economics.
Always. And for India, that security relies heavily on maintaining strategic trade gateways, especially in highly volatile regions like the Middle East.
Which perfectly sets up our 10th and final deep dive of the day. We're looking at the India-Oman Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, which officially came into force on June 1st, 2026.
Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal announced this milestone, and it marks India's sixth major trade agreement in its recent, highly aggressive push for global market integration, following successive deals with the UAE, Australia, the FTA bloc, Mauritius, and the UK.
We're really pushing hard on these agreements.
We are. To celebrate the immediate implementation, the government fast-tracked inaugural consignments of agricultural goods and gems from ports in Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai directly to Oman.
Let's talk about the tariffs, because the numbers here are absolutely huge. Oman is granting 100% duty-free access across 98.08% of its tariff lines.
That's practically everything.
It is. That covers over 99% of India's total export value to Oman, effective immediately. To put that in context, previously under Standard Most Favored Nation, or MFN rules governed by the WTO, only about 15% of our exports entered Oman duty-free.
So this is a night and day difference.
Yeah. This agreement essentially wipes out a 5% import duty on roughly $3.64 billion worth of Indian goods.
In return for that access, India is offering significant tariff cuts on nearly 78% of its own tariff lines for Omani imports, while carefully structuring the deal to protect sensitive domestic sectors like dairy and certain agriculture.
Which is always the sticking point in these deals.
Always. It is a massive, immediate boost for Indian export sectors that rely on volume, particularly textiles, leather goods, plastics, and automobiles. But we have to emphasize a critical distinction in trade terminology here. A CEPA is not just a standard free trade agreement, an FTA.
Right. When we hear FTA, we usually just think about the exchange of physical goods moving across borders in shipping containers. But a CEPA is a much broader, more integrated legal framework.
Exactly. A comprehensive economic partnership agreement goes far beyond just reducing tariffs on physical goods. It includes the trade of services, it covers robust investment protections, harmonization of customs procedures, and strict intellectual property rights enforcement.
And people movement, too, right?
Yes. Crucially for India, it includes frameworks for professional mobility. It creates a streamlined legal pathway for Indian professionals, engineers, doctors, IT specialists to work, reside, and operate in Oman with significantly greater ease.
But beyond the zero tariffs on textiles and the mobility of IT professionals, we have to look at the geographical map, because geography is destiny.
Always look at the map.
The Strait of Hormuz is practically a conflict zone right now due to the broader escalating tensions across West Asia. It is one of the most critical yet vulnerable maritime choke points on the planet.
Look at Oman. Oman controls the Musandam Peninsula. Is this CEPA essentially India securing an emergency, highly integrated backdoor to the Gulf?
If we pull back and look at the grand strategic picture, absolutely. Oman is the only Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, state that has direct, unhindered coastal access to the Gulf of Oman and the broader Arabian Sea without having his shipping lanes cross the treacherous choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. So if Hormuz is blocked by naval mines or deemed too dangerous for commercial shipping by insurance companies, Oman's ports become the sole lifeline for energy transit.
The macroeconomic data already proves this thesis. India's imports from Oman surged a staggering 246.4% in April 2026, reaching $1.5 billion in a single month.
Wow, just because of rerouting.
Exactly. Why did that happen? Because critical resources like crude oil and essential agricultural fertilizers like urea, which would normally be sourced from deeper inside the Persian Gulf, were aggressively rerouted through Omani ports to bypass the Hormuz risks.
That's a brilliant hedge.
It is. And conversely, while India's exports to other Gulf states dropped by over 30% during the recent crisis spikes, exports to Oman only dipped slightly, proving its absolute resilience as a trading partner. The CP isn't just an economic trade deal, it is a brilliant long-term strategic hedge by New Delhi to secure its energy and trade lifelines.
It really is an incredible maneuver. You know, we started this entire session talking about outdated blueprints and the illusion of isolated events. And looking at these 10 diverse topics, the level of extreme global interconnectedness is almost dizzying.
It forces a necessary change in perspective for anyone analyzing policy. We have to ask a difficult question. What if the very systems we rely on for growth and survival are simultaneously the exact vectors of our greatest vulnerabilities?
Think about the tightrope we are walking. We are using Oman's geography to bypass a conflict zone just to secure our basic energy needs. We are actively relying on the Bank of Japan to hold off on domestic rate hikes so our own capital markets in Mumbai don't crash. We are depending on heavy rare earths from a violently fractured junta-led Myanmar just to build our domestic green energy future.
And we are staring down a rapidly approaching future where a simple gene editing tool running on a desktop in a high school biology lab and a fluctuating government bond yield in Tokyo can both fundamentally threaten our national security in entirely different ways.
It's the ultimate modern paradox. As future policymakers, or simply as informed citizens trying to make sense of the news, how do you regulate and navigate a world where the very foundation is constantly shifting while you are trying to stand on it? That is the question you have to carry with you as you analyze tomorrow's headlines.
The blueprint of the world is alive. You have to keep updating your map.
Keep questioning the underlying mechanisms, keep learning the history behind the headlines, and don't take your eyes off the horizon. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the forces shaping our world. We will see you next time.